Well, thank you so much for having me here. Thank you so much for being part of this fantastic conversation we're about to have. And let's just start with questions. Are you ready?
Shoot.
Fantastic. This is for all of you. We'll have about 2-3 minutes to answer so we can keep it, flowing. So economic security is not just about growth, it's about resilience. What's one concrete measure your country or organization is taking to build economic resilience against external shocks? Martin.
Well, during this last year here as working at FIU and also in my private financial capacity, I have been trying to basically pinpoint what are the common interests between the United States and Latin America moving forward, and particularly the threat to national security in the United States that the Chinese involvement in our region has meant, and basically the challenges moving forward. There's been a sort of securitization or weaponization of the agenda of the United States and Latin America in particular, when we look at issues that go beyond the traditional immigration, drug trafficking, illicit transfer of people around the region, but basically to move to areas like where China has made deep already inroads in Latin America in particular. I can mention three. One is trade, the other is investment, infrastructure, the Belt and Road Initiative, and the third, that is less sort of perceived, is the dual use of infrastructure. As we mentioned before in our private conversation before coming in, the increasing presence of ports that have on one part a commercial sort of approach, but in a case of a conflict between China and the United States, this could be used for military or logistics purposes. And that is the case of the port of Chancay in Peru, which has been recently inaugurated by President Xi Jinping in the summit of APEC at the end of last year. And also the possibility in the southern tip of the southern cone of our continent in Ushuaia, in Tierra del Fuego, basically in my country, in Argentina, the possibility of China building a commercial port with different uses. So my key take is that we should look at where are the common interests between the US and Latin America. And I can mention, just for my first sort of introduction to the subject, that there are a few where our interests coincide. One is critical minerals, okay, where you have the sort of golden triangle, but also goes beyond also to Brazil, but the golden triangle, and I will say now basically between Chile and Argentina, in case of lithium and in case of copper, where so far a critical element is that Chinese investment in our region has been mainly extractive. So it has not left value added, it has not created employment for our local population. So the key challenge that when I look at the US Latin American agenda is how to coincide the interest of national security or the threats of national security, the agenda that the US has, with the needs of development that our region has. So when you look at, for example, critical minerals, I would like to see our countries doing or establishing investment protection agreements in order to basically have US involvement, US companies having better involvement in terms of having the security that they need, the rule of law, but also in the key advantage that you could provide is moving along the value-added chain. Okay, for example, instead of basically doing lithium carbonate, basically moving along to build batteries. Batteries not for cars. We don't have the scale to do for cars, but yes, for still batteries, for houses, for factories. That's where there is an advantage there. So establishing bilateral agreements now that the world has moved out from multilateralism, and that now that we have a different world where we have a more transaction diplomacy, no? I see that there is more room, and I would like either, the famous phrase, you need two to tango, the US and Latin America taking positions in this area. The other is infrastructure, and basically not only infrastructure in physical infrastructure, but in digital infrastructure, and in particular in cybersecurity. When you see the possibilities of conflict between China and the US moving forward, although today we have good reasons to be more optimistic about basically what you have is a deal maker as a president, and he goes for the maximum, and then he settles for what is best for the United States, and I think he's getting through, and it's clearer now his agenda moving forward, but clearly in the area of infrastructure, what you need is a compelling alternative. Okay, I sometimes say that when you get together with an American secretary or member of the cabinet, what you get typically is an advice. When you get together with a Chinese official, what you get is a port, what you get is a road, what you get is an airport. So clearly the issue is, how do we bring a balance there? I have some suggestions, I can make it now, but I have to like to pinpoint also on two other key areas, and then I leave it for a second round where I see the agenda, because I like to provide solutions, basically, or how I see solutions. Mm-hmm. The other area is nuclear energy. Clearly, there is an advantage in our regions to produce small nuclear reactors. And what I see is that there is a precedent that Trump 45 has started in Romania. In Romania, the administration was able to remove Chinese influence in Romania and to develop basically a nuclear power plant of around $4 billion, and also a project that is underway at this point to develop small nuclear reactors. What you could have that project is being also widespread to Latin America, in particular where you have in Mexico, in Argentina, and I believe both countries have already developed quite some leeways in terms of the scientific capacity to produce nuclear technology. Last but not least is supply chains. What you have is that the US has a critical need to move supply chains from places that have been really tested in difficult times, like in pandemia, and have not been able to be reliable. So clearly in the area of telecommunications, pharmaceuticals, automotive, biotech, and particularly in the area, the whole technological sort of value-added chain, when we talk about critical minerals, also in the area in the southern cone, in particular in the Golden Triangle, you also have rare earth. And rare earth, as you know, is critical for technology, to build satellites, to build drones, to build the screens of our iPhones, of our notebooks. So those three areas, I would say. And last but not least is more a geopolitical, which is maritime presence. There is a strong depredation of the South Atlantic by Chinese and by other fishing companies. So the protection of the Atlantic, of the South Atlantic, there are also some common interests to develop in the area of defense, in the area of our army, and last but not least is Antarctica. As you are aware, China has also, since the last couple of decades, also declared as an Antarctic power, and they have reached a memorandum of understanding, in particular, for example, with Chile. So they are using the port of Puerto Arenas in order to have some influence on Antarctica. So the collection of scientific projects between Latin America, in particular the countries that have been signatories of the Antarctic Treaty originally in 1957, which the US has been, which Argentina has been, and most of the Latin American countries, developing Antarctica there, because China sees also the capacity to look for minerals in order to feed their industries. And so again, the difference that the US can make is bringing the component of development with these areas, like I mentioned, critical minerals, rare earth, infrastructure, nuclear capacity, and the maritime influence in the Atlantic and Antarctica.
Fantastic. Thank you, Martin. Lauren, are you worried about this situation in Latin America, the fact that, the Chinese are increasing their intelligence collection sites all over? We spoke about that, like spatial site, esa cuestión espacial in Argentina. What are the main concerns?
Well, clearly the main concerns are in the threats that we have to national security in the region, but also how to balance that with the needs of development that our country has. So that is a very sort of difficult balance. At this point, as you are aware, our government has a direct alignment with the United States that has focused mainly in the financial problems that Argentina has, that has been so far relying on the International Monetary Fund and also on financing from China, in particular in swaps to the central bank that has been allowing more dependence from goods from China. So the critical element is that I'm speaking about countries like Argentina, Brazil, I would say mostly South America, is how to tackle that need for development and bringing people out of poverty.
Martin, and if I recall correctly, President Milei said that he would never speak to a communist president. And he's speaking to Xi Jinping, and they're actually signing, agreements. And so what changed?
Well, they're not signing agreement, and the change is the weight of trade. In the case of South America, China is the first trading partner and that is the case of Brazil too. So clearly the issue is that we should move not only from trade, as I said in the previous intervention, in your previous question, the key challenge is how do we move now that the US is looking for reliable suppliers? What reliable suppliers there could be in the region, not only for, I would say that in particular South America has three critical elements to offer to the United States and also to the rest of the world. One is energy security, in particular as you look at the development of artificial intelligence and the development of data centers around the region. Clearly the capacity that our region has to provide energy, as you know, AI data centers are heavily users of energy. So when you look at the development of these industries, what you need is where are the sources of energy? Those sources are particularly in South America. You have, in the case of Argentina, one, again, blessed by natural resources, what is called Vaca Muerta, which is the second largest reservoir of shale gas in the world and the fourth largest reservoir of shale oil around the world. And Argentina has been doubling its production of oil in the region. If you look at 2030, together Mexico, Guyana, Brazil, and Argentina will be providing as much as the Middle East in terms of oil and energy moving forward. Of course, what you need in the case of oil, it's easier. In the case of natural gas, you need further infrastructure, and therefore a critical element is there. So how do we balance those two factors? I would say that in terms of trade, it's more difficult that the U.S. could replace China in the near future. But yes, in the development or in the focusing of where are the new value-added chain, the concept of near-shoring or friend-shoring or allied shoring. There's been a good research by the Inter-American Development Bank showing that the region, with Mexico included, could increase its exports to the United States in the next 10 years by 78 billion in looking to replace. But in areas like I mentioned before, automotive, biotechnology, pharmaceutical, and obviously in the area of technology. Clearly what you have in terms of the capacity to program that the wealth of human capital that we have in the region, and also the cost of human capital relatively less expensive than in the United States, could help really re-engage or have a closer supply chain between in these industries. Of course, the key element is moving forward. How do we move from trade? Because the two legs are trade and investment. No? And the key issue is for Latin America to provide the institutions, the rule of law, the macroeconomic stability in order to give confidence to U.S. institutions, but also to work together in developing that confidence. So,
talking about that confidence, for instance, how do you think that with this administration, the America First policy and those unilateral tariffs to Latin American countries are impacting the trust and the relationship between Latin America, the Caribbean, and the United States? Because the main focus of these tariffs is to bring everything back to the United States, correct? And so,
well, if you read correctly, is bringing it back to America.
Okay.
I have. Basically, I'm sure that all the audience have read a book by Karl Rove, Why the 1896 Election Mattered. And that is the election of President William McKinley, the 25th President of the United States, and its vision of the region, of the Americas, of sort of reshaping the Monroe Doctrine again. And it has had an influence again in the president, in President Trump, in how he views the region. So I will say that it's America first, and then the Americas second, okay? So what you cannot do inside the United States, you will look basically to look at within the Americas, and obviously you need also our countries to take the initiative to tell to the United States what we could do in the private sector, as I said, in technology, in critical minerals, in nuclear energy, in trade and investment, and particularly also in fishing in the Atlantic and in Antarctica. So it's America first and the America second, and for that, you need America and Latin America to focus on where the common interests are.
Thank you. Martin, you wanted to offer solutions to the set of problems that we're facing.
Yeah. First is, what kind of approach should Latin America and the U.S. have? Should the U.S. try to compete with China in terms of resources? Should it try to contain China? I don't think both strategies could work, and also could Latin American countries do sort of bandwagoning. I don't think that will have, it's very cold in here, that I would have the support of our populations. What I have come out after doing a lot of research during this year is that the key concept where there is common interest between Latin America and the United States and Canada is selective engagement. And by selective engagement, I mean to have where are the threats to national security of the United States in the Americas, where there should be red flags there if we want each country to have, you know, a stronger bilateral relationship with the U.S. For example, in the case of new ports that could be built in the region, that should be a red flag that should be put by the United States to the country in question. Of course, there should be alternatives. What kind of alternatives you have for development. But I think those red flags could be basically all of the threats in terms of immigration, in terms of potential conflicts, in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of basically supply chains. Those are the threats to national security where I think that selective engagement should be between Latin America and the US. And then for the rest, let's leave the countries, if we get out of those issues that are red flags for national security in the United States, well, leave each country to do whatever strategy they need to take in order to develop their own countries. Now, I would also like to point out, so first, the concept of selective engagement. Second, the issue of, we have talked about trade, but another critical element is how do we build or how do we construct new investment protection agreements of the next generation, of the cutting edge generation. And by investment protection agreement is bilateral agreements that we can get across the region to provide American companies, Canadian companies, the rule of law, the supranational capacity that if there is a conflict in terms of the exchange rate, in terms of any potential legal litigation, that there could be a source of resolution that could be outside of the courts of our country. So that could give so investment protection of last generation should be, for example, in critical minerals. I would really like to see our countries moving in bilateral agreements of critical minerals where we provide the security that US or Canadian company needs, and we also get in return the investment to develop value-added chain, to develop, for example, batteries, steel batteries for houses or for factories. You develop employment within the region. So that kind of trade-off. Last but not least is focus by American financial institutions. We just mentioned USAID. In this research that I've done during this year, I've seen that USAID has invested or spent, whatever you see this way, in the region $1.8 billion. $450 million has been used in cultural events. Part of that, I would say, in a magazine in Argentina called Amphibia. I don't even know what that magazine is. And to be honest, I found it through my research. So, what is the focus of aid in the US, but also the focus, and I will go to my principal job in the financial world, to the IDB and to the Development Finance Corporation. Those are the two key institutions. As you know, the US has 30% of the voting power at the IDB and has a total control of the Development Finance Corporation. Well, they have been financing everything from environment, which is very important, labor regulations. I will say focus. Social programs. Social programs are very important in our countries, but it should be financed with our own budgets. Okay, but basically what you need from these developmental institutions is to focus in infrastructure, in how to integrate more the Americas. So physical infrastructure and digital infrastructure, cybersecurity. Those are the areas where the U.S. should use its leverage to counterbalance the financial arm that basically China has put into Latin America. So selective engagement, investment protection agreements of last generation, and basically focus of the, always resources by definition are scarce. So focus the muscle, the financial muscle that the U.S. has in these areas that I have mentioned, again, critical minerals, nuclear energy, fisheries, infrastructure, and basically supply chain, focus in how to finance them, in how to integrate better the Americas. That will create a win-win situation to defend the national security of the United States in the region, and also to provide a developmental agenda, an economic developmental agenda for the region.